Michael Holter was a decorated Army veteran. His wife, Caroline, was a devoted nurse. Together, they raised two bright children, Liam and Emma, in what seemed like the perfect American home. But behind the closed doors of their quiet Texas suburb, secrets were building. Secrets that would end in one of the most shocking family tragedies you'll ever hear. Tonight, we uncover the story of how a respected veteran turned his home into a crime scene that left an entire community haunted. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and turn on notifications so you never miss more chilling true crime stories like this one. In the quiet Texas suburb of Willow Creek, life seemed simple, predictable, and safe. Neighbors often spoke of the Holter family as the kind of people everyone wanted living next door. Their two-story brick house had a neatly trimmed lawn, a white porch swing, and the soft glow of warm lights spilling from the windows each evening. On weekends, the smell of barbecue drifted from their backyard, and the sound of children laughing carried across the cul-de-sac. To anyone looking in, it was a home filled with love, discipline, and order. Michael Holter, the man of the house, had the kind of presence people noticed immediately. A decorated veteran, he carried himself with the same precision and pride that had defined his years in the military. He wore his hair cropped short, his posture was upright, and even the way he mowed his lawn seemed meticulous. Many in the neighborhood admired him. Parents encouraged their children to wave at him when he jogged past in the early mornings. To them, he was not just a soldier, but a symbol of honor, courage, and sacrifice. Caroline, his wife, worked long shifts at the local hospital as a nurse. She had a gentle energy that made people feel safe. Patients loved her for her patience, co-workers admired her for her dedication, and neighbors adored her for her kindness. Even when she was exhausted from 12-hour shifts, she still found time to help with school bake sales or organize community yard sales. She was the one who always remembered birthdays, anniversaries, and small gestures that made people feel cared for. Their children, 9-year-old Liam and 6-year-old Emma, completed the picture of perfection. Liam was curious and adventurous, often riding his bike in circles on the street or asking endless questions about the world. Emma was quieter, clinging to her stuffed rabbit everywhere she went, her big brown eyes always watching the world with wonder. Together, the two children added a layer of innocence that made the Holter home seem even more ideal. When neighbors thought of the Holters, they thought of normalcy. They imagined movie nights in the living room, pancakes on Saturday mornings, and prayers before bedtime. Few ever guessed that Michael carried shadows from his past. Years of deployments overseas had etched themselves into him in ways invisible to the naked eye. He smiled when people thanked him for his service, but inside, he battled memories he couldn't silence. His sleep was often broken by nightmares. Loud noises made him tense. And sometimes, he would sit for hours in silence, staring at nothing. Yet none of this was visible to the outside world. Michael was careful to present the image of stability. He laughed at neighborhood gatherings, flipped burgers at cookouts, and posed with his family for Christmas cards that looked as polished as any magazine spread. To the community, the Holters represented everything good about family and country. But beneath the polished image, the cracks were already forming, cracks no one else could see, but ones that would eventually shatter everything. The cracks in the Holter family began as faint lines, so subtle that even Caroline convinced herself for a while that they were temporary. At first, it was Michael's silence. He had always been a man of few words, but now his quiet stretches lasted longer. After dinner, while Caroline washed the dishes and the kids played in the living room, Michael would sit at the table, staring at his plate as though it contained something only he could see. When she asked if he was all right, he would shrug, claiming he was tired. Soon, exhaustion became his only explanation for everything. Then came the outbursts. Small frustrations, like Liam spilling juice on the rug or Emma refusing to finish her vegetables, would send Michael into a rage that felt disproportionate, even frightening. He never raised a hand against them, but his voice, sharp and thunderous, could shake the children into tears. Caroline found herself stepping between him and the kids, offering reassurances while quietly praying the storm would pass. When it did, Michael often sat alone afterward, guilt hanging over him like a heavy coat, though he rarely apologized. The weight of money troubles pressed down on them at the same time. Michael's disability paperwork had been stuck in bureaucratic delays, leaving the family to survive mostly on Caroline's income. Her nursing salary was steady but not enough to keep up with mortgage payments, car loans, and medical bills that seemed to multiply with every passing month. Red envelopes arrived in the mail, stamped with warnings that demanded payment. Caroline tucked them into drawers, not wanting the children to see, but Michael found them anyway. He saw every overdue notice as a personal failure, a reminder that he could no longer provide for his family as he once had. Arguments about finances became common. They whispered at first, late at night after the kids were asleep, but the whispers grew louder, harsher. Michael accused Caroline of doubting him, of believing he was useless. Caroline pleaded with him to seek therapy or counseling, but he refused. To him, admitting he needed help meant admitting weakness, and weakness was something he couldn't bear. Their once warm marriage, built on laughter and shared dreams, now felt cold, dominated by silence and tension. Liam and Emma, young as they were, felt the shift. Liam stopped asking his father to play catch in the yard, retreating instead into his video games. Emma clung tighter to her rabbit, often sitting close to her mother as though she sensed danger in the house. Their laughter, once the soundtrack of the Holter home, grew quieter, replaced by the low hum of unease that settled into every corner. To outsiders, nothing had changed. Neighbors still waved as Caroline drove the kids to school. Michael still nodded politely when he fetched the mail. But inside the house, the family was splintering. Caroline began confiding in a close friend at work, admitting that she felt trapped, unsure how much longer she could keep the peace. And though she didn't know it yet, Michael was already sinking into a mindset where every slight, every unpaid bill, and every moment of conflict felt like proof that the life he had fought so hard to build was slipping away from him. By the time autumn rolled into Willow Creek, the Holter family had retreated further into silence. The neighbors noticed small but unsettling changes, though no one could quite put their finger on what was wrong. Michael, once seen jogging in the mornings with military-like discipline, stopped appearing on the sidewalks. The cheerful shouts of Liam riding his bike and Emma playing with chalk on the driveway grew rare. The house that had once radiated warmth now seemed closed off, blinds drawn, curtains pulled, as if the family was trying to hide themselves from the outside world. Inside, the air was thick with unspoken tension. Caroline was making plans she never thought she would have to consider. She had grown fearful of Michael's volatility, of the unpredictability that hung over every day like a dark cloud. Though he had never laid hands on her, she could no longer ignore the outbursts, the accusations, the way his eyes hardened when arguments flared. The man she had once known as steady and protective now felt like a stranger she couldn't reach. Quietly, she began looking for apartments. She saved small amounts of money, tucked away where she thought Michael wouldn't notice, and even reached out to an attorney for advice. The idea of separation terrified her, but the fear of staying terrified her more. She thought her plans were hidden. But Michael was more perceptive than she realized. One afternoon, while searching for pain medication in her purse, he came across a folded piece of paper. It was a rental application with her name neatly printed across the top, the address of a nearby complex written in bold. For Michael, the sight was like a knife to the chest. In his fragile state of mind, it wasn't simply an application, it was proof that Caroline was preparing to take his children and abandon him. The discovery consumed him. He carried the paper in his pocket, pulling it out when he was alone, staring at it as though it were evidence of betrayal. Each time he looked at it, the thoughts grew darker. He had sacrificed everything for his family. Years of service, blood, sweat, sleepless nights haunted by war. And now, in his mind, they were slipping away from him. The idea of being left behind, alone and powerless, was unbearable. Caroline, unaware that her secret was exposed, continued moving forward cautiously. She spoke in hushed tones with her friend at work, asked about safe neighborhoods, and quietly gathered information. To her, it was about survival, about creating a life where her children wouldn't be raised in fear. But to Michael, every interaction, every quiet phone call, became suspicious. He convinced himself she was plotting against him, that she had already chosen a life without him. As the days shortened and the chill of November settled over Willow Creek, the Holter home felt more like a pressure cooker. Michael withdrew almost completely, spending hours alone in the darkened living room. Caroline tiptoed around him, the children sensing the growing rift without understanding its cause. The walls that once held love and laughter now held fear, secrets, and the beginnings of a deadly spiral that no one on the outside could see. The night of November 14th unfolded quietly in Willow Creek. The streets were still, leaves skittered across the pavement, and the Holter house sat in silence like any other home preparing for another ordinary day. But inside, something far darker was taking shape. Michael had spent most of the evening sitting in the living room, the glow of the muted television flickering across his face. The rental application he had found weeks earlier was folded neatly on the coffee table in front of him. He stared at it for hours, his thoughts circling in the same unbroken loop: betrayal, loss, failure. Caroline had gone to bed earlier than usual, drained from her shift at the hospital. She was exhausted but restless, tossing and turning in the upstairs bedroom, unaware of the storm building below. Liam and Emma had been asleep for hours, their small bedrooms filled with the quiet rhythm of their breathing. The innocence of childhood shielded them from the heaviness that had consumed their home, at least for a while. Sometime after midnight, Michael made his decision. He retrieved his handgun from the locked box in the closet, the same weapon he had kept since his military days. For him, it wasn't just a gun, it was the last piece of control he felt he had left. He moved through the house with a chilling sense of calm, his footsteps measured, his breathing steady. Investigators would later piece together what happened through the position of the bodies and the timeline on Michael's phone. The first shots rang out in the children's rooms. Liam, still in his pajamas, never woke up. Emma, curled up with her stuffed rabbit, remained frozen in an eternal sleep. The violence was swift, silent to the neighborhood outside, muffled by walls that had once protected the family but now hid their destruction. Afterward, Michael entered the master bedroom. Caroline stirred slightly, half asleep, perhaps sensing movement. She never had the chance to rise. The gunshots ended her life almost instantly, leaving behind only the faint smell of gunpowder that clung to the room. When it was over, the house was quiet again. The children's toys remained scattered across the floor. The dishes from dinner were still stacked in the sink. Photographs of smiling faces lined the hallway, smiling faces that would never be seen again. Michael sat in the living room with the gun in his lap, the weight of what he had done pressing down on him. For nearly an hour, he didn't move. He stared at the family photos on the wall, at the paper on the table, at the empty space where his life had once felt whole. At 3:17 a.m., the final shot echoed inside the house. Michael's body slumped forward, the gun slipping from his hand. By the time the sun rose over Willow Creek, the Holter home was still, blinds closed, a silence far heavier than the world outside could ever imagine. The discovery came the following afternoon, when Caroline failed to arrive for her hospital shift. It was unlike her to miss work without calling, and when her phone went unanswered, co-workers grew concerned. After several failed attempts to reach her, one of them contacted the local police for a welfare check. Officers drove down the quiet street of Willow Creek, pulling into the driveway where both family cars sat untouched. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. The lawn was tidy, the blinds drawn as usual, the front door locked. But the silence inside was unsettling. When officers entered the home, the reality of what had happened became clear within moments. The air was heavy, thick with the unmistakable scent of gunpowder that still lingered. Upstairs, the children's rooms were untouched except for the bodies that lay in their small beds. Liam's room still held the glow of a nightlight shaped like a rocket ship, illuminating the stillness of the boy who had once filled it with laughter. Emma's stuffed rabbit was clutched tightly in her arms, frozen in place. Down the hall, Caroline's room told the same story, her body lying motionless under the blankets, the expression of surprise still etched faintly on her face. In the living room, police found Michael slumped in the armchair, the handgun on the floor beside him. On the coffee table lay a single sheet of paper. Investigators expected a suicide note, some explanation of his actions, but it wasn't that. It was a hospital bill, unpaid and stamped in red ink, the total amount due circled in Caroline's handwriting. To them, it was a symbol of the crushing weight the family had been carrying. While no note was left behind, the paper told a story, one of financial strain, mental illness, and unspoken battles that had consumed Michael long before that night. News of the tragedy spread quickly through Willow Creek. Neighbors stood on their porches in disbelief as police cars and ambulances surrounded the Holter home. For years, they had admired the family, envied their apparent perfection. To learn that the same walls they admired had hidden such despair was almost impossible to comprehend. Parents pulled their own children closer, shaken by how fragile even the happiest-looking lives could be. Investigators later concluded that the pressures Michael faced, financial hardship, untreated trauma from years of service, and the fear of losing his family, had converged into a breaking point. To the outside world, he had been a decorated veteran, a father, a husband, and a neighbor. But inside, he was a man drowning in silence, convinced that the only way to maintain control was through destruction. The Holter case left the community haunted. Friends who once waved from driveways now looked at the house with unease, its windows dark, its rooms empty. The tragedy became a grim reminder that appearances can be deceiving, that behind the most polished facades, pain can fester unseen. And though the house would eventually be sold, the story of what happened inside its walls would remain, a chilling memory of how quickly life can collapse when help is never sought and secrets remain buried.